She had always been quiet, the kind of person who moved through life without drawing attention. In her neighborhood, people often saw her walking slowly down the street, her eyes focused on the ground, a soft scarf wrapped around her neck, hands tucked into the pockets of her worn coat. She never hurried, never demanded space or recognition, and the world seemed to move past her without notice. For many, she was just a face in the crowd, someone easily overlooked. But behind her calm exterior was a deep and burning love for music, a passion that had grown quietly, almost secretly over the years. From a young age, she had found solace in the piano. It was the only place where she could truly express herself, where her thoughts and emotions found a voice. The instrument was old, with chipped keys and a slightly uneven tone, but it was hers. And in its imperfections, she found beauty. Every evening, after the noise of the day had faded, she would sit on the small wooden bench, close her eyes, and let her fingers glide across the keys. The music carried her away, lifting her above the worries and the routine of daily life. In those moments, she was free, untouchable, and alive in a way that words could never capture. Her life had not been easy. There had been long periods of struggle, of working jobs that paid just enough to cover basic needs, of dealing with people who underestimated her or dismissed her abilities. Many had tried to tell her that she should focus on practicality rather than dreams, that music could never be more than a hobby. She had heard it so often that at times she began to doubt herself. But deep down, she knew that her love for music was not a passing fancy. It was a part of who she was, as essential as breathing. On this particular day, she was preparing for something she had never attempted before. She had been invited, unexpectedly, to play at a local gathering in a hall she had visited only a few times. The hall was old, with high ceilings and worn wooden floors, the kind of place that carried echoes of decades of performances, both good and bad. She had never imagined she would be asked to play there, and at first, she had hesitated. Doubts crept into her mind, as they often did. What if she was not good enough? What if people laughed or criticized her? What if she made a mistake and ruined the opportunity forever? But as she stood outside the building, she reminded herself of all the times she had played alone in her small apartment, the hours she had spent perfecting a melody, the countless nights where music had been her only companion. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air against her face, and stepped inside. The hall smelled of old wood and dust, of years of history and faded grandeur. Rows of chairs were arranged in neat lines, and the stage at the front was dimly lit. A single piano waiting silently, almost expectantly, as if it knew she was coming. At first, the room was empty except for a few staff members preparing for the event. They moved quickly, setting up chairs and checking microphones. But their eyes flicked toward her now and then, curious about the quiet woman who had arrived. She carried herself with a calm determination, holding a small bag containing her sheet music and a notebook filled with notes and ideas she had written over the years. She walked toward the piano slowly, almost reverently, her fingers brushing against the polished wood of the keys even before she sat down. There was a strange comfort in the touch, a reassurance that she was exactly where she needed to be as she began to play a few notes quietly to herself. Testing the piano, she noticed that a few people had stopped to watch. Their expressions were unreadable, some showing mild interest, others skepticism. She ignored them, letting her fingers find their rhythm, letting the music flow naturally. The sound was gentle at first, hesitant, as if the piano itself was waking from a long sleep. But soon, it grew stronger, more confident. Each note seemed to carry not just her skill, but her entire story, the long nights, the sacrifices, the hope that had never dimmed despite everything. Time seemed to slow. She became aware of the faint creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic outside, even the subtle echoes of her own breathing. None of it mattered. Only the music existed, and within it, she felt a connection to something greater than herself. The melodies she played were not just notes on a page. They were memories, emotions, dreams, and fears, all intertwined. She remembered the encouragement of a teacher long ago who had seen potential in her, the quiet applause of family members who had supported her from the sidelines. and even the moments of loneliness that had shaped her resilience. For a moment, she thought of turning back, of leaving the hall, and retreating to the safety of her usual routine. But then, a small voice in her mind reminded her why she was there. Music had always been her way of speaking when words were not enough. It had been her companion through doubt and fear, her solace in times of sadness, her celebration in times of joy. To walk away now would be to deny a part of herself that she could never truly ignore. The room began to fill slowly. Chairs were being arranged, lights adjusted, and a few early attendees wandered in, murmuring among themselves. Some noticed her sitting at the piano and paused, curious. Others glanced briefly before continuing with their tasks, not realizing that they were about to witness something unexpected. She could feel their attention, the subtle shift in energy, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the keys, on the music that had always spoken louder than words. As she continued to play, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had faced countless obstacles, from financial struggles to moments of self-doubt. From people who had dismissed her dreams to situations that had tested her patience and determination. Each challenge had shaped her, made her stronger, and deepened her understanding of herself and her art. She realized that every note she played was a testament to that journey. A way of sharing her experiences without needing to explain them. The sound of the piano began to fill the hall more fully, resonating off the walls and ceilings. Even the staff members who had been moving about paused for a moment, listening. The music had a clarity and honesty that was impossible to ignore. It was not about impressing anyone or proving a point. It was simply an expression of her truth. In that moment, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her, a sense that no matter what happened next, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Minutes passed like hours as she played, lost in the flow of the music. Her hands moved with a natural grace, each note carefully considered, but delivered with emotion and spontaneity. She experimented with dynamics, letting soft passages contrast with powerful crescendos, exploring the full range of expression that the piano allowed. It was as if the instrument itself had become an extension of her body, responding to her thoughts and feelings in real time. The first few attendees who had wandered in now stood near the back, quietly observing. Some whispered to each other, unsure of what to make of the scene. Others simply stood in silence, captivated by the unexpected beauty that was unfolding. She remained unaware of their reactions, fully immersed in the act of creation. For her, this was not a performance to be judged. It was a moment of pure connection, conversation between herself and the music that had been her companion for so long as she played. Memories of her past performances, small recitals at school, and private shows in community centers came flooding back. She remembered the nervousness she had felt, the thrill of playing well, and the quiet pride that had followed. Those experiences, however small they seemed at the time, had built the foundation for this very moment. She realized that all the years of practice, the sacrifices, and the perseverance had led her to this hall, to this piano, to this precise instant where her music could be heard. She paused for a moment, letting the final chord linger in the air. The sound slowly faded, leaving a quiet hum in the room. She opened her eyes and looked around, noticing the subtle shift in the atmosphere. People who had been skeptical or indifferent were now paying attention. Even those who had not expected much seemed to sense that something significant had just occurred. The music had spoken, and it had spoken clearly. In that silence, she felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief, because she had played honestly without fear or pretense. Anticipation, because she knew that this was only the beginning. The hall would soon fill, the event would start. She would have to face the challenges of performing in front of a larger audience, some of whom might doubt her abilities. But she also knew that the music had already created a connection, a bridge between her and the people who would hear her. That connection could not be undone by words or judgment. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air against her skin, and allowed herself a small smile. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of calm excitement, a quiet confidence that she had rarely experienced. The piano had welcomed her, had responded to her touch, and had given voice to the part of her that could not be silenced. In that moment, she understood that no matter what happened next, She had already succeeded in a way that mattered most. She had stayed true to herself and her music as the room continued to fill with staff and early attendees. She began to play a gentle, flowing melody once more, letting the music set the tone for the event to come. She knew that challenges awaited, that not everyone would understand or appreciate her performance, but she also knew that she had something unique to offer. The quiet woman who had once been invisible was now becoming a presence that could not be ignored. And all of it had begun with a simple act, sitting at the piano, allowing her music to speak louder than words, louder than doubt, louder than fear. The room was beginning to fill, and she could feel the energy shift. People moved in slowly, chatting softly, taking their seats, and occasionally glancing toward the piano where she sat quietly. Some seemed curious, others impatient, and a few were clearly skeptical. She could sense it all without needing to look up. The weight of expectation hung in the air like a heavy curtain. And though she had prepared herself, she felt a tiny flutter of nerves deep in her chest. She reminded herself that this was not about pleasing anyone. It was about expressing herself through the music she loved. As she adjusted her sheet music, a group of event organizers approached her. Their expressions were firm, some even sharp. One of them leaned closer and spoke quietly, but with a hint of authority. "You weren't scheduled to play right now," they said. "We have other performers, and we need to stick to the plan." She nodded slowly, keeping her voice calm. "I understand," she said. "I just wanted to warm up a little. When the time comes, I will play." They exchanged looks, clearly annoyed. One of them stepped back and muttered under their breath, "We don't have time for distractions." Their tone made it clear they did not believe she belonged there. She felt a pang of frustration, but she kept her expression neutral. Arguing would not help, and she had learned over the years that persistence, patience, and quiet confidence often spoke louder than confrontation. She returned her attention to the piano, letting her fingers brush the keys lightly. She could hear murmurs from the audience as they settled into their seats. Some whispers were curious, questioning. Others were impatient, dismissive, even mocking. A few glanced toward the staff as if seeking permission to ignore her presence entirely. The room seemed to pulse with doubt, but she let it wash over her without letting it sink in. Her focus remained on the music. As she began to play again, softly at first, she felt a shift. The notes were gentle, almost like a conversation with herself. Slowly, the melody grew more confident, carrying a hint of emotion that was raw and sincere. The skeptics might not realize it yet, but she was beginning to connect with the room in a way words could never achieve. Each chord, each phrase, seemed to reach across the space, finding its way to people even before their minds could form judgments. A few of the early attendees stopped their conversations, drawn to the piano by the unexpected beauty of the sound. Some moved closer, quietly watching, their faces betraying surprise. They had not expected a hidden talent, and it was beginning to unfold in front of them. She noticed, but she did not let it distract her. Her goal was not to impress. It was to speak through music, to tell a story without uttering a single word. The organizers returned, their expressions darkened further. "We told you," one said sharply. "You were interrupting the schedule." She kept her eyes on the keys and let the notes flow. "I am only warming up," she said softly. "When my turn comes, I will play fully." One of them shook their head. "We don't have time for this. People are here for the program. You will have to wait or leave." For a moment, she felt a flicker of fear. The idea of being removed from the stage, of having her opportunity taken away before it even began, made her stomach tighten. But she took a slow, steadying breath and reminded herself of why she was there. Music had been her refuge, her companion, and her voice for years. She had faced far greater obstacles alone in her small apartment, and she had never given up. Why start now? So, she continued to play, letting the piano speak for her. The melody grew richer, carrying emotion and depth, each note filled with a quiet strength. The room seemed to pause around her. The murmur of conversation faded, and even the staff, who had been tense and impatient, stopped to listen. The music had a way of commanding attention without demand. It drew people in, making them sit up straighter, lean closer, and listen more carefully. Among the attendees, some started to exchange glances. Whispers of surprise and curiosity spread quietly across the room. "Who is she?" one person murmured. "I didn't expect anything like this," said another. Even those who had doubted her seemed caught off guard by the honesty and power of her playing. She did not smile, did not pause to acknowledge them. She let the music continue, allowing it to carry her message with clarity. The organizers seemed unsettled. Their attempts to assert control had failed. She was not confrontational or loud, but the piano itself had become her advocate. The notes carried persistence and dignity, qualities that could not be dismissed. They had tried to shut her down, but she had responded not with words, but with something far more powerful, her music. She shifted slightly, adjusting her posture, and let her fingers dance across the keys with increasing confidence. The melody began to change subtly, growing more expressive and dynamic. Moments of gentle reflection alternated with bursts of energy, each phrase telling a different part of her story. It was as if the piano had become a mirror of her experiences, reflecting both the hardships she had endured and the quiet triumphs that had carried her forward. The room was slowly transforming. People who had arrived with preconceptions or doubts were now listening intently, their attention captured by the unexpected depth of her performance. Some faces softened, a few brows lifted in surprise, and even the skeptical organizers seemed momentarily caught off guard. It was clear that the music was reaching them in ways that no argument or persuasion ever could. For her, the moment was more than just a performance. It was a statement of presence, a way of asserting that she had a voice and it deserved to be heard. She thought of all the times she had been dismissed, overlooked, or ignored. Every hardship, every moment of doubt, had led to this precise instant, where she could let her music tell the story she had carried inside for so long. Minutes passed like hours as she played. The melody ebbed and flowed, sometimes delicate, sometimes forceful, always honest. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, the tension giving way to engagement. People were leaning forward, their eyes fixed on her hands, their ears attuned to every note. Even those who had tried to shut her down could not escape the power of what was unfolding. When she paused briefly to take a breath, the silence was almost palpable. The room was still, filled with a sense of anticipation. She looked up for just a moment and saw faces of people who had come to dismiss her now filled with curiosity, admiration, and surprise. It was a quiet victory, one that required no applause or words. She had spoken through the only medium that truly mattered, the music. She continued to play, building on the momentum, letting the piano express what words could not. The notes were not just sounds. They were emotions, memories, and unspoken thoughts, all woven together. Each phrase carried sincerity, each chord resonated with authenticity, and each pause created space for reflection. She was no longer just a quiet woman in the room. She was a presence, a storyteller, and a force that could not be ignored. Time seemed to dissolve as she played. She became aware only of the keys under her fingers, the resonance of the piano, and the subtle reactions of the audience. It was an intimate exchange, a dialogue that transcended doubt and expectation. The skeptics' attempts to shut her down had become irrelevant. The music had created a space where judgment could not enter, where the only thing that mattered was the truth of expression. As the melody reached a gentle conclusion, she allowed the final notes to linger in the air, echoing softly against the walls. The room was silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, a faint murmur began to rise, soft at first, like ripples spreading across water. She did not rush or respond. She let the music settle, letting its impact be felt fully before any reaction. It was clear now that something had changed. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from one of doubt and impatience to one of attention and quiet respect. People were no longer focused on schedules, rules, or prior judgments. They were listening, present, and aware that they had witnessed something unexpected. She could feel it, and it gave her a sense of quiet satisfaction and renewed determination. She rose slightly from the bench, adjusted her posture, and allowed her hands to rest gently on her lap. The piano had spoken for her. It had carried the weight of her story and the strength of her determination in a way that no words could. And though challenges still awaited, she knew that she had already taken a vital step. She had claimed her space, made her presence known, and begun to transform skepticism into attention. The stage, the audience, and even the organizers could no longer ignore her. And in that realization, she found a profound sense of peace and readiness for what was to come. She sat back for a moment, letting the final chord from her last piece fade into the hall. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, yet strangely comforting. It was the kind of silence that is not empty but full of possibility, where every breath seems to carry meaning. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly amazed. For the first time, she understood that this was not just about playing music. It was about choosing to speak when others tried to silence her. The organizers were still tense, their brows furrowed, their lips pressed together as if waiting for her to falter. One of them cleared his throat and said sharply, "You really shouldn't be up here yet. There are rules, and the schedule must be followed." She nodded politely, keeping her expression calm, and said softly, "I understand. I just need a few moments to prepare. When it is my time, I will play." He shook his head, clearly frustrated, but there was no malice in her response, no challenge, just a quiet determination. She returned her attention to the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She could feel the tension in the room, and instead of letting it weigh her down, she used it to fuel herself. Every doubt, every skeptical glance, every attempt to shut her down became a part of the energy she poured into her music. She started with a soft, tentative melody, one that was introspective and gentle. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying emotion that was both personal and universal. She allowed herself to get lost in the music, to let her fingers move instinctively across the keys. The melody was not meant to impress. It was meant to communicate, to tell a story that could not be told with words alone. And as she played, she felt something shift in the room. The audience began to respond. The people who had been whispering, who had been doubtful, started to lean forward slightly, their attention drawn irresistibly to the piano. Even the staff, who had been watching anxiously, paused in their tasks, caught by the unexpected power of her performance. There was a quiet awe growing, a sense that something unique was happening right in front of them. Her hands moved faster now, the melody gaining complexity and depth. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, translating every thought, every feeling, every memory into sound. She thought of all the years she had spent practicing alone, of the long nights when no one had listened but her piano. Every struggle, every doubt, every moment of loneliness had been transformed into these notes. And now, in this hall, filled with people who had questioned her music was finally being heard. She glanced up briefly and caught a few surprised expressions. A woman in the front row had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with astonishment. A man near the back leaned forward, clearly taken by the intensity and honesty of the playing. Even the organizers, who had tried to enforce rules and schedules, looked unsettled. Their authority seemed diminished in the face of something that could not be contained, something that spoke louder than words. The melody grew bolder, stronger, filled with emotion that was impossible to ignore. She allowed herself to express joy, sorrow, hope, and determination, all in a single flowing sequence of notes. The music had a voice that was both intimate and commanding, inviting each listener to feel it deeply, to be a part of it. She could see the change in the room, the skepticism fading, replaced by attention, curiosity, and even admiration. She did not pause to acknowledge it. She let the music continue, letting it carry the message she could not speak aloud. Minutes passed, each one filled with movement and emotion. The piano was alive under her hands, responding to every shift in thought, every change in feeling. She allowed herself to explore contrasts, soft passages followed by powerful crescendos, delicate phrases followed by confident chords. It was a conversation between herself and the instrument, and through it, she began a conversation with everyone in the room. The music spoke for her, when words could not. As she played, she remembered the moments that had brought her here. The long hours of practice, the sacrifices, the doubts she had faced, and the small victories that had kept her going. She had been told she was too quiet, too ordinary, too simple to stand out. But the piano had always believed in her, and now it was helping her show others that strength and talent often hide in the most unexpected places. Her fingers moved with confidence now, guided by emotion and experience. The hall seemed to respond to her, the acoustics amplifying every note, every chord, giving them a richness and warmth that made the music feel alive. She felt herself becoming fully present, entirely immersed in the act of creation. The audience, too, was drawn in, some sitting forward in anticipation, others closing their eyes to feel the music more deeply. She was no longer a quiet woman in the background. She had become the center of attention, not through force or demand, but through the power of her expression. She allowed herself a brief pause, letting the sound resonate, the echoes filling the space. In that moment, she could see the subtle changes on faces across the room, the skepticism, the doubt, the casual dismissal, all giving way to quiet respect and genuine interest. She felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where her music spoke louder than anyone's doubts or judgments. With renewed energy, she continued to play, exploring new melodies and variations. Each phrase was deliberate, each chord intentional. But there was also a natural flow that made the music feel spontaneous and alive. She played with sensitivity, listening to the way the notes interacted with the room, adjusting her touch and tempo to create the desired effect. It was as much a dialogue with the space as with the audience, a careful weaving of sound and emotion. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every sound she produced was met with attention, the subtle shifts in energy palpable. The music was no longer just an expression of her own feelings. It was a shared experience, a bridge connecting her to everyone present. Even those who had been most resistant, most certain that she did not belong, could not deny the impact of what she was creating. Her quiet presence had transformed into something undeniable, something powerful, something that could not be ignored. As the melody reached its climax, she poured every ounce of emotion into the final passage. Her hands moved rapidly, yet with precision, delivering a series of chords that were both intense and beautiful. The piano sang under her touch, resonating with every feeling she had ever held close. The music carried joy, sorrow, longing, hope, and resilience all at once, creating a tapestry of sound that left no room for doubt. When the last note finally faded, there was a moment of silence, a pause so profound it seemed as though the hall itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, quiet at first, hesitant, then growing steadily. She did not look up immediately. She let the sound wash over her, taking in the energy and acknowledging the transformation that had occurred. The room, once filled with doubt and dismissal, was now filled with attention and respect. The organizers who had tried to stop her now exchanged uncertain glances. The authority they had tried to assert had been rendered irrelevant by something far more powerful, the honesty and skill of her music. She did not seek their approval, nor did she need it. Her validation had come through the piano, through the connection she had established with the audience, and through the courage she had shown in remaining true to herself as she gently rested her hands on her lap. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced skepticism, doubt, and the threat of being shut down. And she had responded not with confrontation, but with authenticity and dedication. The music had spoken for her, louder and clearer than any words could have. She had not only expressed herself, but had also begun to change the perception of those around her. She knew that the event was only beginning, that there were challenges and performances yet to come. But she also knew that she had crossed an important threshold. The quiet woman who had once been invisible was now present, acknowledged, and starting to command attention. And as she prepared herself for what was next, she did so with a confidence born not of arrogance, but of experience, persistence, and the knowledge that when she allowed herself to speak through her music, her voice could reach farther than she had ever imagined. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover above the piano keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. The hall was quiet now, filled with anticipation, and she knew that the next piece she played would be crucial. This was the moment when she could show the full depth of her ability, when she could turn doubt into admiration and skepticism into respect. Her heart beat faster, but it was not fear, it was excitement. A quiet thrill that came from knowing she was about to share something truly personal with everyone in the room as she began. The notes came slowly at first, tentative, as if testing the space and the people within it. Then, gradually, the melody grew, richer, fuller, more confident. Each chord was deliberate, each phrase carefully constructed, but flowing naturally, like a river that had found its own course. She was not trying to prove herself to anyone. She was simply letting the music speak, allowing it to carry her story to everyone who would listen. The audience was mesmerized. People who had entered the hall with preconceived notions now leaned forward, their eyes fixed on her hands, their ears attuned to every note. The staff who had once been tense and dismissive now paused, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding performance. Even the organizers, who had tried to enforce schedules and rules, were silent, caught off guard by the honesty and skill of what they were witnessing. Her music was no longer just sound. It was emotion, memory, and experience woven together. Each note carried a story, a fragment of her life that had been kept hidden in quiet practice rooms and empty apartments. She thought of the long nights spent alone, practicing in dim light, of moments of self-doubt and fear, of small triumphs that had encouraged her to keep going. All of it was here in the music, speaking louder than any words or explanations ever could, as the piece developed. She allowed herself to express joy, sorrow, hope, and determination all at once. The melody rose and fell, creating a dynamic tapestry of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. She played with intensity and sensitivity, knowing when to soften the touch of her fingers and when to strike the keys with power. It was a delicate balance, one that required complete focus and complete surrender to the moment. And she felt fully alive in that space, connected to the piano, the music, the people around her. Time seemed to lose meaning. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she explored the full range of the piano, letting each note and chord resonate with clarity and emotion. The audience was silent, caught in the spell of her performance. Whispers had stopped, movement had ceased, and even the subtle sounds of the hall, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of programs faded into the background. All that remained was the music, the connection it created between her and everyone present. She allowed herself to take risks, to push the music into unexpected places, to explore contrasts and tensions. Soft passages flowed into powerful crescendos, gentle rhythms into complex sequences, each transition reflecting the depth of feeling she carried within her. It was a dance between control and freedom, precision and expression, and she felt a sense of exhilaration as the notes flowed through her. This was the essence of her passion, the core of what she had been cultivating for years, and now it was fully revealed. As she continued, she noticed subtle changes in the audience. Eyes widened in surprise, brows lifted in admiration, and even those who had been most skeptical now sat forward, fully engaged. People whispered to one another quietly, sharing their amazement, but no one interrupted. The room had become a shared space of attention and emotion. It's a place where the music could speak for itself without distraction. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had reached them, that her dedication and talent were being recognized without her needing to say a single word. The organizers, who had once tried to stop her, now exchanged uncertain glances. Their authority and control seemed irrelevant in the face of the music she was creating. They could not argue with the truth of her expression, nor could they diminish the impact it was having on everyone present. She did not seek their approval. She felt a quiet sense of victory in knowing that she had overcome their attempts to shut her down. The piano had become her voice, her advocate, and it was speaking louder than any challenge or doubt. She allowed herself a brief pause, letting the music linger in the air. The echoes of the piano filled the hall, creating a resonance that seemed to touch every listener. In that moment, she could see the subtle shifts on faces across the room: curiosity, admiration, awe, and even respect. It was a quiet transformation, a shift in perception that required no words, no confrontation, only the honesty of her music. She had begun to change the way people saw her, simply by being true to herself and her passion. With renewed energy, she continued to play, weaving new melodies and variations into the performance. Each phrase was intentional, each chord deliberate, yet there was also a natural flow that made the music feel alive and spontaneous. She explored the full emotional range of the piano, moving from delicate, introspective passages to bold, dramatic sequences. The music carried both vulnerability and strength, reflecting the complexity of her experiences and the depth of her soul. The audience was fully captivated. People who had doubted her ability were now listening with rapt attention, moved by the sincerity and skill of her playing. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched her hands with fascination, marveling at the control and expressiveness she displayed. The hall seemed to vibrate with the resonance of her performance, creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and powerful. She thought of all the times she had been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Every challenge, every moment of self-doubt, every quiet struggle had led her to this instant. And now, as the piano sang under her fingers, she realized that those experiences had shaped her into the musician she had become. They had given her depth, resilience, and a perspective that allowed her to connect with the audience in a way that was authentic and profound. As the piece reached its climax, she poured every ounce of emotion into the final chords. Her hands moved with precision and passion, delivering a sequence of notes that was both powerful and beautiful. The piano seemed to respond to her completely, resonating with clarity and richness. The music carried the full range of human emotion, telling a story of struggle, perseverance, hope, and triumph. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had given everything she had to the moment. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a silence that seemed to hold the weight of everything that had just happened. Then, slowly, a wave of applause began, quiet at first, then growing steadily, filling the hall with sound. She did not move immediately, letting the audience's response settle, absorbing the energy and acknowledging the connection that had been created. The music had spoken, and the people had listened. The room, once filled with doubt and skepticism, was now united in appreciation and admiration. The organizers, who had tried to enforce schedules and control, now looked uncertain and humbled. Their attempts to shut her down had failed, not through argument or confrontation, but through the undeniable power of her expression. She had remained true to herself, and in doing so, she had won the attention and respect of everyone present. The music had become her language, her statement, and her triumph. As she rested her hands on the piano, a sense of peace washed over her. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and attempts to silence her. Yet she had responded with authenticity, patience, and passion. The audience had felt her story, had been moved by her honesty, and had recognized the skill and emotion she brought to every note. She knew that this was only one moment in a larger journey, but it was a crucial one, a turning point where her presence, talent, and dedication could no longer be ignored. She looked around the hall, seeing faces that had shifted from doubt to admiration, and felt a quiet gratitude, not for the applause, not for the recognition, but for the opportunity to share her music and her truth. She had spoken through her art, and it had been hard. And as she prepared herself for the next part of the event, she did so with a sense of confidence, strength, and readiness. Knowing that the piano had given her a voice that could never be silenced, no matter the obstacles she might face, she rose from the piano bench slowly, letting her hands fall to her sides as the echoes of the final note hung in the air. The applause that followed was steady and growing, not polite or hesitant, but genuine, filled with admiration and amazement. She did not rush to respond, did not,